The smell of freshly ground coffee beans fills the air as I adjust the vintage espresso machine one last time. In 3 hours, this empty space will be filled with customers, but more importantly, my family. The same family who laughed when I quit my corporate job to play cafe owner. The same mother who told me I'd never succeed without her financial help. The same siblings who made bets on how quickly I'd fail. They have no idea what I've built. Not just this cafe, my sanctuary crafted from reclaimed wood and secondhand furniture, but something much more valuable. Something that will change our family dynamic forever. I trace my fingers over the framed document hidden in my office. The one I'll reveal tonight when they think they're just attending another family obligation. My hands shake, but not from fear. For the first time in my life, I hold all the cards. The invitation said 7 p.m. sharp. Knowing my mother, she'll arrive at 6:45 to criticize my choices before anyone else shows up. Perfect. I need her to see everything exactly as I've planned it. This cafe represents more than my dream. It's my declaration of independence from a lifetime of being the family disappointment. Tonight, everything changes, and they have absolutely no idea what's coming. Growing up in suburban Massachusetts, our family was the picture of New England success. On the outside, my father, an accountant who worked endless hours, was barely present. My mother, Sarah, ran both her interior design business and our household with military precision. My older brother James followed in Dad's financial footsteps, while my younger sister Melissa inherited Mom's eye for aesthetics and her cutting perfectionism. Then there was me, Elizabeth, or Lizzie the Dreamer, as they mockingly called me. The middle child who dared to be different. I wasn't practical like James or artistic like Melissa. I was the one who changed college majors 3 times before settling on English literature, the most useless degree possible, according to my mother. Family gatherings at our colonial-style home were performances for the neighbors, followed by private critiques of everyone's failures. Thanksgiving 2015 stands out in my memory. I'd just been promoted to junior editor at a small publishing house in Boston, my first real career achievement. I brought an apple pie I'd spent hours perfecting.
"Ah, sweetheart," Mom said, placing my pie beside Melissa's elaborate tart. "It's quaint, but we already have a proper dessert." She transferred my pie to the kitchen counter, where it sat untouched all evening. Meanwhile, Dad announced he'd started a college fund for Melissa's future children because at least one daughter would give them grandkids worth investing in. Then came my 30th birthday, 4 years ago. I'd saved enough for a down payment on a small commercial property, an old bookstore with an apartment above it. When I shared my dream of turning it into a cafe bookstore, the family intervention began. "Lizzie," Mom said, wine glass in hand, "be realistic. You have no business experience." "The failure rate for new restaurants is over 60% in the first year," James added, not looking up from his phone. "If you want to play shop owner, maybe start with something less complicated," Melissa suggested, "like a lemonade stand?" They laughed, all of them. Dad cleared his throat. "Your mother and I discussed it. We'll loan you the money for a sensible condo instead, something you can't destroy with your impulsiveness." That night, I declined their generous offer and walked out. 3 weeks later, I signed the papers for my building without telling them. I quit my editing job the following month. For 2 years, I worked multiple gigs. Barista by morning, freelance editor by night, weekend shifts at a bakery to learn the trade. I lived on ramen in my tiny apartment above what would become my cafe, Chapter 1. The grand gesture they never saw coming was already in motion. While renovating, I discovered a hidden safe behind a false wall in what became my office. Inside was a journal belonging to my grandmother, my father's mother, who died when I was 10, the woman I was named after, Elizabeth. The journal revealed the true origin of my father's family money. My grandmother hadn't inherited it from her banker father, as we'd all been told. She had built a successful chain of diners across Massachusetts in the 1950s and 60s as a single mother after my grandfather abandoned them. My father had erased her achievement, claiming the business as his father's, then his own smart investments. My grandmother's legacy had been stolen, her entrepreneurial spirit buried under my father's shame about his mother being just a waitress who got lucky. The journal included property deeds, account numbers, and letters establishing trusts, including one in my name that had matured on my 30th birthday, a trust I never knew existed, a trust worth enough to fund my café 3 times over. This was my secret, the one I would reveal tonight, not just to claim my inheritance, but to reclaim my grandmother's erased legacy, and in doing so, rewrite my own story in this family. The week before the grand opening, I sent formal invitations to each family member. Not text messages or emails, heavy cream cardstock with gold embossing that screamed important occasion. Mom called immediately. "A cafe opening, Elizabeth, on a Thursday night? Your father has an early meeting Friday." "It's important to me, Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The whole family needs to be there." "Need is a strong word for coffee and pastries," she replied, "but we'll make an appearance. Your sister is bringing Harrison." Harrison, Melissa's investment banker fiancé, whom my parents already treated like a son. I spent the next week in a blur of preparation. The cafe was ready, Edison bulbs hanging from exposed beams, bookshelves lining the brick walls, the espresso machine gleaming on the reclaimed wood counter. My small team, Jade, a tattooed pastry chef I'd met at the bakery, and Miguel, a barista with a literature degree like mine, helped me prepare a special menu for the evening. At 6:30 p.m. on opening night, I changed into a simple black dress and my grandmother's pendant, a small gold key I'd found with her journal. I placed the framed document in a gift bag beneath the counter. The journal sat open on my desk, bookmarked to the page that would change everything. As predicted, my mother arrived at 6:43 p.m. She wore her signature tailored blazer and pearls, my father trailing behind her in his Brooks Brothers suit, looking impatient. "Elizabeth," she said, air-kissing my cheek, "this is charming, though the location is concerning. Is this area even zoned properly for business?" "It's been a commercial property for 80 years, Mom," I replied. "Can I get you some wine? We have a local Chardonnay." "I suppose," she glanced around critically, "these tables seem wobbly. And that light fixture is off-center." Dad barely acknowledged me, immediately taking a business call in the corner. James arrived next, accompanied by his wife Claire, who gave me a genuine hug. Claire had always been kind to me, perhaps because she recognized a fellow outsider in the Porter family dynamic. "This is wonderful, Lizzie," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Melissa and Harrison were last, 15 minutes late. My sister looked like she'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine in her designer dress, while Harrison's handmade Italian shoes probably cost more than my first month's lease payment. "So bohemian," Melissa announced, surveying the space. "Very alternative." As other guests arrived, friends, neighbors, former colleagues, my family clustered together near the windows, creating their own exclusive island. I watched them from behind the counter as I prepared drinks, catching snippets of their conversation. Must have maxed out her credit cards. 6 months tops before she's asking for a bailout. Could have had a corner office by now if she'd stuck with publishing. The knot in my stomach tightened. I'd expected their dismissal, planned for it even, but it still stung. Jade touched my arm. "You okay, boss? Your family seems like they're attending a funeral instead of a celebration," I finished. "That's normal for them." At 8 p.m., I clinked a spoon against a glass, calling for everyone's attention.
The cafe fell quiet as I moved to the small stage area where we'd host poetry readings and author events. "Thank you all for coming to the grand opening of Chapter 1, I began. "This place represents a dream I've had for many years." I noticed my mother checking her watch. My father was still half-turned toward the door. James was scrolling through his phone. "Before we continue the celebration, I want to share something special with my family." I looked directly at them. "Mom, Dad, James, Melissa, could you join me up here?" They exchanged glances. My mother's face tightened with that familiar look, the one that said I was making a spectacle of myself. Reluctantly, they made their way forward. "Elizabeth, is this necessary?" my mother murmured as they assembled beside me. "Absolutely," I replied. "This cafe isn't just my dream, it's my heritage." The confusion on their faces was just the beginning. I was about to light the fuse on 2 generations of family secrets, and once lit, there would be no going back. Just then, the cafe door swung open. A tall, elderly man with familiar eyes stepped inside, leaning on a cane. My heart stopped. I recognized him instantly from the photos in my grandmother's journal. My grandfather, Robert Porter, who supposedly died before I was born. My father went pale. "Dad?" he whispered. The timing couldn't have been more perfect or more catastrophic than I had planned. The cafe fell silent. My father stood frozen, his face drained of color as he stared at the man in the doorway. "Hello, Richard," my grandfather said quietly. "It's been a long time." My mother gripped my father's arm. "Richard, what is happening? Who is this man?" My father's voice was barely audible. "My father." "Your dead father?" she hissed. I stepped forward, my heart hammering. This wasn't part of my plan. I'd found my grandfather through a private investigator 3 months ago, but he wasn't supposed to be here tonight. He was supposed to meet my father privately tomorrow. "I invited him," I said firmly, "and since he's here, we might as well get everything out in the open." My mother turned on me, eyes flashing. "What have you done, Elizabeth?" The moment had accelerated beyond my control, but perhaps this was better. No more secrets, no more lies, no more pretending. "What I've done," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear, "is discover the truth about our family, the truth you've all buried." I walked behind the counter and retrieved the gift bag, then returned to the makeshift stage where my family stood in various states of shock. 4 years ago, when you all laughed at my dream of opening this cafe, I made a decision. I would do it without your support or your money. What I didn't know then was that I already had everything I needed. I removed the framed document from the bag, my grandmother's trust certificate with my name on it. When I bought this building, I found Grandma Elizabeth's journal hidden in the walls. She owned a chain of diners across Massachusetts, businesses that funded the trust, that paid for my education, that paid for this cafe. Money that was specifically designated for me on my 30th birthday. I handed the frame to my father, whose hands shook as he took it. "But that wasn't all I found," I continued. "I learned that Grandma wasn't just lucky, as you always said, Dad. She was brilliant and determined. She built her business while raising you alone, because Grandpa didn't die in an accident. He left you both." My grandfather stepped forward. "Your father was ashamed of me, of your grandmother's success. He created a story where his father was a respected banker who died tragically, not a failed musician who couldn't handle his wife's success." "That's enough," my father snapped. "No, it's not," I countered. "For years, you've treated me like I was irresponsible, impractical, a disappointment. You erased your mother's accomplishments because they didn't fit your narrative of success, and you've tried to erase me for the same reason." I turned to my mother. "You never thought I was good enough because I wasn't interested in the right things. But Grandma Elizabeth saw something in me that you couldn't or wouldn't see." My sister stepped forward, her perfect composure cracking. You're saying you've had money this whole time? That you've been pretending to struggle while we felt sorry for you? Felt sorry for me? I laughed incredulously. You've never felt sorry for me a day in your life, Melissa. You've competed with me, belittled me, but never empathized with me. James finally looked up from his phone. This is why you invited us? To humiliate Dad in public? No, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I invited you because despite everything, you're still my family. I wanted you to see what I've built, what our grandmother built. I wanted you to be proud of me, just once. The cafe remained unnervingly quiet. My friends and other guests looked uncomfortable, witnessing our family's dirty laundry being aired so publicly. My father finally spoke, his voice cold. You had no right to contact him, he said, nodding toward my grandfather. No right to dig up the past. I had every right, I replied steadily. It's my past, too. My mother's face had turned to stone. We're leaving. This spectacle is inappropriate. Of course it is, I said. The truth is always inappropriate in our family. I watched as my parents turned to go, my mother practically dragging my father, who seemed to have aged a decade in minutes. Melissa followed, pulling a confused-looking Harrison along. James hesitated, looking between me and our retreating parents. You could have done this privately, he said quietly. Would any of you have shown up if I had? I asked. He didn't answer, just shook his head and followed them out. The bell above the door jangled as it closed behind my family. I stood alone on the small stage, suddenly aware of every eye on me. My grandfather remained near the door, leaning heavily on his cane. The confrontation I'd planned had spiraled into something far more explosive than I'd intended. But as I looked around at my cafe, at Chapter 1, I realized I was standing in the physical manifestation of my truth. I hadn't just built a business, I'd reclaimed my heritage and my identity. I took a deep breath and turned to my guests. Well, I said, finding a smile from somewhere, who needs more coffee? The days following the grand opening passed in a blur. Chapter 1 was busier than I'd anticipated, partly due to genuine interest in our coffee and books, and partly, I suspected, because word had spread about the Porter family showdown. Nothing draws a crowd in Massachusetts quite like New England WASP drama. My grandfather, Robert, stayed in town. We met for breakfast each morning before the cafe opened, piecing together the fragments of our family history over coffee and scones. Your grandmother was extraordinary, he told me on the third day. Too extraordinary for the man I was back then. Why did you come back now? I asked. He placed a weathered hand over mine. Because you reached out. Because I've spent 40 years regretting my choices. Because I wanted to see what Elizabeth's granddaughter had built. The cafe's phone rang constantly that first week. Melissa called to tell me I'd ruined her engagement dinner. Apparently, Harrison's parents had questions about the family stability after witnessing our public spectacle. James texted to ask for copies of Grandma's financial records for family archive purposes. I didn't respond to either. My mother's calls went straight to voicemail. Her messages evolved from furious, "How dare you humiliate your father like that?" to bargaining, "We should discuss this trust situation with our family attorney," to finally, surprisingly, reflective. "I never knew your grandmother. Richard never wanted me to meet her." On the 10th day, Claire, James's wife, came to the cafe alone. She ordered a latte and sat across from me during my afternoon break. "They're a mess," she said without preamble. "Your father hasn't gone to work. Your mother is redesigning their living room for the 3rd time this year. James is digging through family financial records. And Melissa?" Claire smiled slightly. "She's been researching female entrepreneurs of the 1950s. Says she's doing it to understand the context of the family embarrassment. But I caught her looking impressed. I wasn't sure how to feel about that." "Why are you here, Claire?" Because someone should be, she said simply. And because I always liked you, Lizzie. You're the only porter who's ever been real. 2 weeks after opening night, my father appeared at the cafe just before closing. Miguel glanced at me questioningly as he wiped down the espresso machine. I nodded, and he discreetly retreated to the kitchen with Jade. My father looked older, the lines around his eyes deeper. He stood awkwardly by the counter, declining my offer of coffee. I found these, he said, placing a small box on the counter. After your revelation, I went through some storage boxes in the attic. Inside were photographs. My grandmother in front of various diners, her arm around a young boy I recognized as my father. In one, she stood proudly beneath a sign reading, Elizabeth's. I had forgotten these existed, he said quietly. Or maybe I wanted to forget. Why? I asked. She built something amazing. He stared at the photos. My friends' fathers were doctors, lawyers, businessmen. My mother wore a uniform and served pie. When I got to Harvard Business School, I reinvented us. You erased her? He flinched. I thought I was protecting her legacy by turning it into something more acceptable. By turning it into a lie, I said, but without the anger I'd felt for weeks. It was replaced by something closer to pity. Yes, he admitted, a lie that got bigger over the years until I couldn't find my way back to the truth. We sat in silence, the photographs between us. Have you spoken to your father? I finally asked. Once, he replied. It was difficult. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted about difficulty with parents. Your grandmother would be proud of this place, he said, looking around. It has her spirit. It was the closest thing to approval he'd ever given me. Not quite an apology, not quite acceptance, but a beginning. The following Sunday, I closed the cafe for a private event. I'd sent invitations, different from the grand opening ones, simpler and more personal, to each family member. I wasn't sure any would come, but they did, arriving one by one. My mother brought a houseplant, her version of an olive branch. James and Claire came with their twin boys, who immediately gravitated to the children's book corner. Melissa arrived alone, without Harrison, which felt significant. My grandfather came last, using his cane more for balance than support now. My father stood when he entered, and though they didn't embrace, they shook hands, a formal truce. I served my grandmother's recipes, coffee cake from her diner days, egg salad sandwiches with her secret addition of dill, and strong black coffee. I've been thinking about Grandma's journal, I said when we were all seated, about what she built and what it meant. She created spaces where people could gather, eat, and connect. That's what I want to do here. I took a deep breath. But I also want to honor her properly, so I'm renaming the cafe. I unveiled the new logo I'd designed, a simple sketch of a key like the one on my pendant, with the name Elizabeth's Chapter 1. This is the first, I explained. I'm using the trust to open a second location next year. My mother's eyebrows rose. You're expanding already? I have a good business model, I replied with a small smile, and good genes, apparently. Later, as my family prepared to leave, more cordially than they'd arrived, my grandfather pulled me aside. There's something you should know, he said quietly, something not in the journal. He told me about a property in Rockport, a small building near the harbor that my grandmother had purchased in the 1970s but never developed. She always said it was for something special, something that would come later. I think she was waiting for you, though she never knew you. The deed, he explained, had been transferred to my name along with the trust, though it wasn't explicitly listed in the documents I'd found. It had been my grandmother's final expansion plan, the last chapter she never got to write. The unexpected twist in my story wasn't just the discovery of this additional property. It was realizing that my grandmother had somehow seen me coming, had believed in a future she wouldn't witness, but wanted to provide for anyway. 2 days later, I drove to Rockport. The building was weathered but sound, with large windows overlooking the harbor. As I stood on its empty floor, watching boats sway in the distance, I felt my grandmother's presence, not as a ghost, but as a continuation, a thread connecting us across time. I touched the key pendant at my throat. Chapter 2, I whispered to the empty space, already seeing what it could become. A year has passed since that night when my family's carefully constructed facade crumbled in my café. Elizabeth's Chapter 1 has become a cornerstone of the neighborhood, and Elizabeth's Chapter 2 opens next month in Rockport, a bookstore cafe with a writer's retreat upstairs. My father and grandfather now meet weekly for chess and reluctant conversation. My mother has started collecting biographies of female entrepreneurs from the post-war era. Melissa broke up with Harrison and is developing her own interior design brand, separate from our mother's company. James still works in finance but brings his sons to my cafe every Saturday morning for story time. We're not a perfect family. We probably never will be. But we're an honest one now, facing our history instead of burying it, acknowledging our flaws instead of pretending they don't exist. The most valuable inheritance my grandmother left wasn't the trust or the properties, it was the truth that our stories don't have to be defined by other people's expectations. That sometimes the most radical act of self-love is believing in your own vision when no one else does. So if you're watching this and feeling unheard, unseen, or underestimated by the people who should support you most, know that your story isn't finished yet. Your legacy isn't written in their dismissals or their doubts. It's written in your persistence, your courage, and your refusal to make yourself smaller to fit their narrative. If you found something valuable in my story, please subscribe to hear more about entrepreneurship, family dynamics, and finding your own voice. Like this video if you've ever had to fight to be taken seriously. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong, it's proving yourself right.